The hayride will not stop. The tractor has been circling the same field for 3 hours, but the driver has been dead since the first loop, his eyes fixed on the road while the riders pass the same barn. The same bodies, over and over. Each time the corpses look a little fresher, a little closer to getting up. Somewhere else, a college girl rewinds the pumpkin patch security footage and freezes. The scarecrow that should be bolted to its post is standing 10 feet behind her. In every clip, inching closer each hour she worked alone. On a mountain highway, a photographer pulls over for a hitchhiker he has already passed twice on different roads at different times, and this time the stranger smiles and greets him by his full name. At a harvest festival, a food inspector watches a woman roll up her sleeve and sees something crawl under her skin, moving against the bone like it is trying to find a way out. 4 true fall horror stories, 4 nights that started normal and ended as something no one who survived will ever talk about in the daylight. Story 1. The Closing Shift. Sarah Brennan stared at the live camera feed in the pumpkin patch office, frozen so hard she forgot to breathe, because every scarecrow on screen had turned toward the lens like it heard her watching, and the nearest one, an old burlap-faced thing that was supposed to be wired to a wooden post, was pressed up against the office door, fogging the glass with slow, patient breaths. She could see the stitched mouth, the damp straw at the collar, and the shadow of a head that wasn't straw at all. She should have run right then, but what happened next changed everything. Her phone buzzed with a text from her manager. "Lock up tight. Don't let anyone in. Don't call the cops unless you're sure." And the words hit her like a slap because she hadn't told him anything was wrong yet. An hour earlier, the shift had been normal in that bored, seasonal way. Parents bargaining over pumpkins, teenagers daring each other into the corn maze, the smell of kettle corn riding the cold air. And Sarah had done her rounds the same as always. Sweep the porch, count the register, check the storage shed, then take one last look at the cameras because the owner was paranoid about vandalism. That was when she noticed the first mistake in the world. Scarecrow number 6. She knew them by number because she'd helped set them up. Was not where it was supposed to be. At first she blamed the wind, but there wasn't any wind, just a thick October fog settling into the rows like something poured from the sky. And when she rewound the footage, she saw it had been wrong all day, moving in little jumps between frames, never while anyone looked directly at it, always when the camera flickered or a passing head blocked the view for a second. She told herself it had to be a prank, some employee messing around, but the footage didn't show anyone dragging it, and the scarecrow's shadow didn't match the sun. Then she caught the second detail, the one that made her skin go tight. In the background, far down the pumpkin rows, there was a person standing perfectly still between 2 piles of gourds, not wearing a costume, not holding a phone, just watching the office like they knew exactly where she'd be. Sarah almost left the monitor and walked out to the parking lot, but what happened next changed everything. Her keys weren't on the desk anymore. She searched the drawers, the trash bin, the floor under the chair, and with every second the office seemed smaller, the air thicker, the fluorescent light buzzing like a fly trapped behind her eyes. She found her keyring on the windowsill, arranged neatly beside the employees only sign, and her stomach turned because she hadn't gone near the window. Outside, the fog pushed against the glass so hard it looked solid, and somewhere out in the maze a child laughed once, too sharp, too close, then stopped like someone had pinched it off. Sarah grabbed the radio and called for the other, closer, but the radio answered with only static and a soft, wet clicking underneath like fingers tapping a microphone. She tried her manager again, voice shaking, and he finally answered with a whisper. "Don't open the door," he said, as if he was hiding too. "We've had problems. Just stay inside until I get there." Relief almost made her cry until she realized he should have been 10 minutes away an hour ago. A slow scrape sounded at the door. Sarah leaned toward the glass and saw straw, yes, but also a knuckle, pale and swollen, dragging down the pane and leaving a slick line. She backed away, heart hammering, and the cameras all blinked black for half a second. When they came back, the scarecrow was no longer at the door. It was inside the office, standing behind her chair, close enough that she could smell damp earth and something sour, like old vegetables left too long in a closed room. Sarah didn't scream because her lungs refused. She turned inch by inch and saw the burlap mask wasn't stitched onto a head. It was pulled over a face, tight at the cheekbones, wet at the mouth, and beneath the ragged eye holes were real eyes, wide and unblinking, reflecting the monitor's green glow. It lifted a hand that was half glove, half skin, and in that hand were Sarah's keys. She snatched the letter opener from the desk and swung without thinking, the blade ripping burlap and catching something that felt like cartilage. And the thing recoiled with a sound that wasn't pain but hunger disappointed. Sarah bolted for the back exit into the corn maze because it was the only way out that didn't force her past the front door. And as soon as she pushed into the stalks, the fog swallowed her like a mouth. The corn stood tall and close, dead leaves rasping her face, and she ran on instinct toward where she thought the road was, until her phone light caught a row of scarecrows that hadn't been there yesterday, lined up like an audience, all facing her, all wearing something familiar. The jackets customers had left behind, the flannel from Lost and Found, the kid-sized hoodie, and one that made her blood go cold. Her manager's work coat, the name patch still sewn on. She heard the tractor engine of the hayride somewhere far off, looping and looping, but no music, no voices. When she finally broke through to the parking lot, her car was there with the engine running and the driver's door open like it had been waiting for her, and for one desperate second she believed she'd made it. Then she saw the inside, mud on the seat, corn husks on the floorboard, and on the dashboard, perfectly centered, her keyring, set down gently like a gift. Behind her, the corn rustled in a slow, deliberate wave, not wind-driven but paced, footsteps hidden by dry leaves. And Sarah understood the last awful truth. Whoever or whatever had been moving the scarecrows hadn't been trying to scare her away. It had been practicing how to stand, still how to blend in, how to wait, so it could follow her home. Story 2. Mile marker 47. Marcus Webb's hands were shaking so badly the steering wheel squeaked under his grip, because the hitchhiker he'd dropped off an hour ago was standing in his headlights again. Same tall frame, same too-thin smile, except now the man was wearing Marcus's jacket, the brown canvas one Marcus could feel on his own shoulders right now. And the impossible sight made his brain stutter like a bad signal. Marcus slammed the locks, checked his mirrors, and told himself it was a trick of distance, a look-alike, anything. But what happened next changed everything. The hitchhiker lifted his chin and mouthed Marcus's full name, first, middle, last, slow and careful, like he'd practiced it for years. 20 minutes earlier, Marcus had been coasting the Blue Ridge Parkway at dusk, hunting the last light that turns the maples into fire, feeling that quiet satisfaction of a day that finally went right. And he'd even laughed at himself for jumping when the GPS briefly froze and the radio hissed with static. The first time he saw the hitchhiker was near an overlook. Just a figure by a stone wall, thumb out, face hidden under a hood. And Marcus almost didn't stop, but the man's posture was wrong in a way that tugged at the conscience. Not desperate, not impatient, just waiting like the roadside belonged to him. The hitchhiker climbed in without asking and smelled like cold leaves left in a wet pile. And his voice was polite and flat as he said, "You're taking photos," even though Marcus's camera bag was zipped shut on the back seat. Marcus nodded, uncomfortable, and the man added, "It's a good year for it. The colors are honest. They drove in a silence that felt staged, and when Marcus tried casual conversation, "Where are you headed? How long have you been out here?" the hitchhiker answered with little half-smiles, giving directions that didn't match any town name Marcus knew, then finally said, "Just past mile marker 47 is fine," as if the number meant something sacred. Marcus pulled onto the shoulder near the marker, the last smear of sunset bleeding through the trees, and the hitchhiker stepped out, pausing with one hand on the door as though he might change his mind. Then he looked straight at Marcus and said, "Don't waste your battery tonight," and walked into the woods without a flashlight. Marcus sat there for a full minute, listening to the forest settle, and when he started driving again, the GPS rerouted him in a sharp, impatient spiral, insisting he was off course even though the road was a single line through the mountains. He chuckled under his breath, tried to reset it, and the screen blinked, once, twice. Then the time jumped backward 20 minutes. He stopped again because the nausea of that tiny impossibility was stronger than fear, and when he checked his phone, the clock matched the car's wrong time, like reality itself had agreed to the lie. The radio popped with static, and buried under it, a soft voice repeated, 47, 47, 47, as if the number was being counted somewhere far away. Marcus almost turned around, but what happened next changed everything. His camera app opened by itself, and the screen filled with a photo he didn't remember taking. His own face, asleep, mouth slightly open, lit by the dashboard glow shot from the passenger seat. He jerked the phone back like it burned him, but there were more images when he swiped, his hands on the wheel from an angle that couldn't exist unless someone was sitting beside him. The mile marker 47 sign framed perfectly, with a shadow behind it shaped like a man with his hood up. The interior of his car with the passenger seatbelt stretched tight as if it had been worn hard. Marcus's throat went dry as dust, and he drove without thinking, desperate for the first gas station, the first other person, any proof he wasn't alone in a loop that only he could feel. The fog thickened in low pockets across the road, and the trees leaned in close like an audience waiting for the next line. Then his headlights caught a figure on the shoulder again, and for a second Marcus felt a hot flash of relief. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe he could ask for help. Until the hood lifted and the same face turned toward him with that patient smile. Marcus didn't stop. He kept driving, jaw clenched, eyes forward, but the hitchhiker's reflection appeared in the rear view anyway, seated behind Marcus's right shoulder as if he'd always been there, and the voice came softly from the back seat. "You went the long way last time." Marcus spun around and saw nothing. Empty seats, his camera bag, a folded map. But when he faced the road again, the hitchhiker was standing in the headlights, closer than before, and this time he was wearing Marcus's jacket. The exact same tear near the cuff and the same dried mud on the pocket, even while Marcus still felt the fabric against his own skin. Marcus slammed the brakes, locked up in panic, and the car shuddered to a stop beside mile marker 47. The sign gleaming white in the beams like a bone. The hitchhiker stepped forward and placed a palm on the hood with gentle familiarity, leaning down until his face filled the windshield. Through the glass, his eyes looked wrong, not evil, not monstrous, just old with waiting, and he spoke clearly without moving his lips much, like he was conserving energy. "I told you not to waste your battery," he said. And Marcus's phone, sitting in the cup holder, dropped from 12% to 1% in a single blink. Marcus fumbled for the charger, hands numb, but the cable was gone, neatly coiled on the passenger seat like it had been placed there, and on top of it lay Marcus's driver's license, flipped face up as though someone had been studying it, memorizing him. The hitchhiker tapped the glass once, twice, then pointed toward the woods, toward the place. He'd vanished before, and Marcus understood with a sick clarity that this wasn't about directions or rides or help. It was about collection, about being taken somewhere the road didn't reach. Marcus tried the ignition, nothing, and the dashboard clock began to tick backward in fast, hungry jumps, rewinding the night with mechanical certainty until the radio hissed and the soft counting started again. 47. 47. And behind the fogged windshield, the hitchhiker smiled wider, like the loop was tightening. Story 3. The Corn Harvest. Nina Patel didn't realize she was screaming until her throat burned because the festival worker's forearm had split in thin vertical cracks like dried earth, and something pale and fibrous was pushing out between the seams. Tiny white roots, slick with blood, writhing under the flashlight beam as if the man's skin was only a husk that couldn't hold the harvest anymore. The worker wasn't crying. He was smiling through clenched teeth, eyes glassy with a hunger that didn't belong to him, and he whispered, "Don't waste it," like Nina was about to throw away food instead of saving a life. She should have called for an ambulance immediately, but what happened next changed everything. Behind him, the corn-themed booth lights flickered, and the crowd, families, kids with face paint, couples in flannel, turned in near-perfect unison toward the smell of blood, not with shock, but with interest, as if they'd been waiting their turn. 6 hours earlier, Nina's day had started with paperwork and annoyance, the kind of small, stubborn stress that makes real danger feel impossible. She'd been assigned to follow a string of minor GI complaints tied to harvest festivals across Iowa and Illinois, and everyone she spoke to treated it like routine. Too much fried dough, cider too sweet, a few stomach bugs. At the first town, she walked past hay bales and pumpkin stacks and listened to a volunteer laugh about festival flu, then watched a teenager vomit behind a trash can and stagger away pale but smiling, wiping his mouth like it was embarrassing, not alarming. Nina wrote it down, took a few samples, and almost convinced herself it was nothing, until she noticed the pattern. The sick weren't just nauseous, they were ravenous, buying more corn dogs, more kettle corn, more roasted corn brushed with butter so heavy it dripped down their wrists, eating with a focus that looked almost devotional. At the second festival, the complaints weren't just stomach cramps. People were complaining of a crawling sensation under the skin and a faint, sweet rot smell that clung to their clothes like they'd been stored in a silo. Nina tried to trace vendors and suppliers, but every booth owner gave the same answer with the same casual shrug. "We all get it from Harvest Gold," as if a single distributor feeding 3 states was normal, and as if it didn't matter that Harvest Gold wasn't listed on any invoice they could show her. By the third town, Nina stopped eating entirely because the air itself felt contaminated, thick with sugar and grease and the sour note underneath, and she began to feel watched in a way she couldn't explain. Not stalked by one person, but noticed by the crowd, like the crowd could tell she didn't belong because she wasn't consuming. When she checked into a roadside motel that night, she found corn husks in her suitcase even though she hadn't bought any corn. And in the bathroom mirror, she saw a faint yellow dust on her eyelashes like pollen. She scrubbed her face until it stung, but the smell stayed, sweet, damp, and agricultural, stuck at the back of her throat. The next morning at the 4th festival, she finally got access to the cold storage trailer behind the vendor row, expecting spoiled produce, maybe unsanitary conditions, maybe rodents. Instead, she found pallets of vacuum-sealed cornmeal bags stacked like bricks, each stamped with the same logo, Harvest Gold, and each bag subtly pulsing at the corners as if something inside was settling or breathing. Nina cut one open and the cornmeal spilled out in a soft avalanche, but mixed through it were thin white filaments that clung together, living threads that recoiled from the light. She jumped back, heart pounding, and stepped on something crunchy that wasn't corn. A tooth. She tried to report it, but the festival director's radio only hissed, and the few workers she flagged down stared at her with that same polite, flat expression she'd begun to see everywhere, listening without blinking, as if her words needed time to sink into soil. Nina pushed deeper into the crowd, searching for a uniform, a cop, anyone who looked awake. And that's when she saw the festival worker stumble out from behind a corn-roasting tent, clutching his arm. He looked embarrassed more than hurt, laughing weakly, insisting he'd just burned himself, and Nina followed him into the shadowed gap between trailers where the music was muffled and the air smelled like wet feed. He rolled up his sleeve to show her, and the skin wasn't burned. It was splitting, cracking in clean lines, and the roots were already there, pressing outward like they'd been growing for days. Nina lifted her flashlight, trying to stay calm, trying to think like an inspector instead of a person trapped in a nightmare, and she told him they needed a hospital. The man's smile twitched, and he leaned closer like he was sharing a secret. "Hospitals throw things away," he said. "This is the harvest." Then his eyes slid past Nina's shoulder, and his whole face softened into relief. Nina turned and saw the crowd filling the gap between trailers, shoulder to shoulder, too quiet, too still, their mouths shiny with grease, their hands empty like they'd come without money because they didn't need to buy anything anymore. A child at the front licked salt from his fingers and stared at Nina's neck with the calm concentration of someone reading a menu. Nina backed up, the worker shuffling forward with his cracked arm extended, and she felt something itch beneath her own skin. Faint at first, then undeniable, a crawling line along the inside of her wrist as if a thread had been pulled tight under the surface. She looked down in the harsh white beam and saw just beneath the skin a pale filament moving slowly toward her palm, tracing the path of her veins like it already knew the way. She tried to run, but the crowd stepped in the same direction at once, and the smell of sweet rot surged so strong it made her gag. Nina shoved through, elbows and shoulders hitting soft bodies that didn't resist like people. They yielded like packed grain, until she burst into the open and sprinted across the festival grounds past laughter and music that suddenly sounded recorded, looped, wrong. She reached her car, fumbled the keys, and when she finally peeled out onto the highway, she didn't feel safe. She felt late, like she was driving away from a field after the seeds had already been planted. At a red light outside town, she saw her reflection in the rearview mirror and froze. A dusting of yellow at the corners of her eyes, and when she blinked, it didn't smear like dirt. It clung like pollen. Beneath her sleeve, the itch kept moving, patient and methodical. And Nina understood the most terrifying part wasn't the crowd or the roots or the distributor that didn't exist. It was that whatever was happening didn't need her permission. It had already started growing. Story 4, Loop 13. Taylor Reeves hit the ground running the second her boots found dirt, jumping off the hayride so hard her knees buckled, because the actor in the barn scene hadn't been acting. His fingernails were torn, his lips were blue, and when he grabbed her wrist, he whispered, "It doesn't end," with a voice that sounded like someone talking through water. The tractor kept going without the driver speaking a single word, dragging the wagon onward as if it was on rails. And Taylor sprinted across the rows toward the parking lot lights, chest ripping for air, sure that if she could just reach her car, she could make this night normal again. She burst through the last line of corn and saw her car immediately. Same faded bumper sticker, same dent by the rear wheel. Sitting under a weak floodlight with the engine running and the driver's door hanging open, and relief nearly made her cry, until she saw herself slumped in the front seat. Her own body sat folded at an impossible angle against the steering wheel, hair stuck to her forehead, one hand hanging limp with her phone still recording, the screen bright in the dark like an eye that refused to close. Taylor stumbled closer and the phone audio reached her before she could think. The distant tractor engine, the same screams, the same line from the narrator at the start of the ride. "Welcome to Blackwood Acres, folks, where the harvest never ends." And the sound matched what she could still hear behind her as the hayride rolled on without her. She should have turned away, should have run until her lungs collapsed, But what happened next changed everything. Her dead phone on the seat, her dead phone that was somehow still alive, buzzed with a new notification, and on the lock screen was a timestamp from 6 hours earlier. A time when Taylor could still remember laughing in line with her friends, complaining about the cold and filming dumb clips for social media. The memory hit like a wave and pulled her under. Earlier that night, the attraction had felt like any other Halloween cash grab. Hay bales, fake cobwebs, actors in masks posing for photos. And Taylor's friends had been hyped, daring each other to sit in the back row because that's where the actors get you. The first sign something was wrong was small. The safety briefing played twice, word for word, as if someone had accidentally restarted it. The second sign was smaller and worse. The tractor driver never blinked. Even in the floodlights, even when someone shouted a joke right at him, his eyes stayed fixed forward, dry and glassy, hands locked on the wheel like they'd been nailed there. Taylor had leaned toward her best friend to whisper that it was creepy, and her friend had whispered back, "He's probably just committed to the bit," and laughed. Until the laugh died when the wagon rolled past a cornfield where a figure stood between the stalks, not moving, not waving, not wearing a mask, just watching with a calm that felt personal. The hayride route was supposed to be a loop, a short circle through staged scenes, but it kept going. The same scare setup repeated. Burned-out cabin, hanging props, the witch with a lantern, yet each time they came around the details were more decayed. The ropes more frayed, the props wetter like the night was rotting while they watched. The actors didn't reset positions, they stayed where they'd been left, slumped or kneeling, breathing too hard, eyes unfocused, hands trembling, and one of them had real blood soaking through his costume. Taylor tried to stand up and demand they stop the ride, but the wooden rail was slick under her palms, coated with something that smelled like old pennies and wet hay. Then the wagon entered the barn scene. Red lights, fake chainsaws, recorded screams, and the man in the corner wasn't pretending to be tied up. His wrists were raw, skin peeled, and when the strobe hit his face, Taylor saw terror there, not performance. He lunged as far as the rope allowed and caught her wrist, nails scraping her skin, and he whispered, 13, like it was the only word that mattered. The tractor never slowed. Taylor screamed for help. Her friends screamed with her. The crowd noise from the speakers swelled louder, drowning out the real voices, and when the wagon rolled out of the barn, Taylor realized she couldn't see the entrance anymore. Only the same stretch of corn, the same fence, the same path. Like the world beyond the attraction had been erased. That was when she jumped. Now, in the parking lot, staring at her own body in her own car, Taylor's mind refused to accept what her eyes insisted on. She reached into the open door with shaking fingers and touched the cold skin of her own hand, and the contact sent a sick jolt up her arm as if her nerves recognized themselves and rejected the truth. Behind her, the tractor engine grew louder again, approaching the lot from the corn like a giant animal returning to feed. Taylor turned and saw the hayride wagon emerging through the fog between the stalks, following the same invisible track, and she saw herself in it too, alive, screaming, clutching the rail, alongside her friends, repeating the same fear with the same words, trapped in a moment that would not move forward. The wagon rolled past her car without stopping, wheels crunching gravel, and as it passed, every rider's head turned toward Taylor in perfect synchronization. Faces pale, eyes wide, mouths open mid-scream that never finished. Taylor tried to shout at her looping self, tried to warn her, tried to change anything, but her voice came out thin and useless against the engine's steady drone. The wagon disappeared back into the corn, and for a heartbeat the lot was silent except for Taylor's breathing, until her phone buzzed again in the dead hand on the seat. On screen, a new clip saved itself automatically. A shaky video from the wagon. Taylor's own face filling the frame as she whispered, "If you're seeing this, it means you got out." and her eyes flicked past the camera, terrified of something behind her. Taylor's stomach dropped because she had never recorded that message. Yet there it was, dated 1 minute from now. In the distance, the barn lights flickered back on, resetting the scene like a stage preparing for the next audience, and the tractor engine began to return, patient as a heartbeat coming around for loop 13.